Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to this very, very, very wet Saturday right here in Brisbane. Well, it's the election day, so, do you actually know what you need to do when you go and do this voting? That's happening today. And there's so much confusion out there, and because many people are not quite 100% sure of what's to be done. Here's that report.
It's the final sprint to election day, so it's time to brush up on how voting works and answer your commonly asked questions so you know what to do on Saturday. Let's start with the basics. Where you need to go to cast your vote. Well, you can head to any polling place in your state or territory, normally located at schools, churches or community buildings. Every polling place will have the forms for your local candidates, even if you're outside your electorate. To find out where your closest voting centre is, just Google Where to Vote AEC and it'll take you to the Electoral Commission website. If you're travelling outside your state, you need to find a specific interstate polling booth on the AEC website. So next, what your options are if you can't vote on election day. At this stage, your options are running out. Postal voting has closed, but you can still vote before Saturday at certain pre-poll stations listed on the AEC website. Now, the question of what happens if you don't vote. Well, voting is compulsory in Australia, so if you don't vote, you'll be up for a $20 fine. And finally, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, so what happens if you have COVID on Saturday and are isolating? Well, for the first time ever, the Electoral Commission has started an emergency telephone voting service. You'll have to prove you have coronavirus by showing a positive COVID test, either a PCR or a RAT. And first, you need to register your results on the AEC website and then follow the steps.
We're doing telephone voting for COVID positive electors who tested positive after 6 p.m. on Tuesday night, and we've already had 1,300 people register for that service.
Let's bring in Triple J's Hacks political reporter Claudia Long now to take us through what you'll find in the polling booth on the day. Hi there, Claudia. So we will be given two forms. Let's start with the green one for the House of Representatives. Firstly, let's just recap, what is the House of Representatives and who are we voting for in this one?
So the House of Representatives is the lower house of Parliament, and it's where you're going to be electing your local member, so your local MP who represents your electorate or seat, which is basically like a fancy name for your local area. And the lower house is really important because it's where it's decided who's actually going to be in government. So you need 76 seats to win, and so this is where we'll be voting, for our local members. And the way you do that is by numbering every box on the form that you're given in the order of who you'd like to see elected. It's pretty easy.
Take us through then how we vote using that green form.
Yeah, sure. So you'll be handed a green form, just like you said, Rods, by the AEC when you rock up at the polling booth on election day. And basically all you do is you number from 1 to however many boxes in on the form. You number them all from 1 to last in the order of who you'd like to see elected.
Right, let's talk the Senate now then. Who are we voting for here?
So the Senate is where we elect people to represent our entire state or territory. So if you are living in a state, you have 12 senators. If you're living in a territory, you just have 2. And this form is a bit bigger because there's often more people running for the Senate.
It is a little more complicated, isn't it? So what are our options here?
You have a few options, which is great if you love voting. So basically, if you want to get it over and done with quickly, the quickest way to vote is above the line, where you, similarly to the lower house, number at least 6 boxes in the order of the parties that you'd like to see elected. Now, in that case, the parties do have control over which candidates within their group are elected first. But if you have a specific order of candidates that you would like to see in the upper house representing your state or territory, then you can number below the line. It does take a little bit longer. You have to number at least 12 boxes. But if you're very enthusiastic, you can number them all if you would really like to. That takes a little bit longer, but you can, I guess, have your own specific order of which candidates you would like to see in the Senate. So you could number somebody 1 from one party, then 2 from another, then 3 back to that same party you numbered earlier. It's really all in your hands.
Okay, and how do these forms relate to preferences then, Claudia? Why do we have preferences?
So I actually went and asked the AEC why we do preferential voting. That's the Australian Electoral Commission. And they told me that basically the reason that you have to number all of these preferences is because of the formal voting guidelines that are actually set out in legislation. And so what your preferences are is it's basically your vote. So, you know, you'll put your first preference next to somebody, but if they don't win and they're knocked out of the race, then your vote will be redirected to your second preference. And this is, it's good because it's representative. It means that one person who hasn't gotten much of the vote but happens to have come, first in the first round doesn't necessarily win. It's really much more reflective of the community's choice.
Yeah. We've had questions, Claudia, about whether you can waste your vote by voting for certain minor parties or independents.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about preferential voting, I think, is that you can't waste your vote. You can vote in line with your values, and if your first choice that maybe doesn't get elected, then your vote will flow on to your second, your third, and so on and so forth. So you definitely cannot waste your vote in Australia. We can't say this enough. You cannot waste your vote.
And where could young people's votes potentially have the most impact?
Well, we've actually done some analysis at Triple J of electoral enrolment data, and looking at some seats in Queensland, it looks like it's going to be really interesting to see how the youth vote has an impact there. So in Brisbane and Griffith, two marginal seats, 25% of voters enrolled in those electorates, so a quarter, are 18 to 29. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how much of an impact young people have in those two very marginal seat races.
For a wrap of the campaign, the Age's Nikki Sava and the Australian's Greg Sheridan join me. Let me ask you both the same questions to start off with. What do you think this election campaign has actually been about? What is the choice here? Greg Sheridan first.
Well, Lee, I think it's been a shabby and poor campaign. It hasn't been full of hatred like the last two American presidential campaigns. There's been no policy narrative from either side. All we've got is a vast array of indistinguishable spending promises. Seems like the only thing voters will take from politicians at the moment is cash. The Coalition's offering us $1.2 trillion of debt, and Labor's offering us the same plus a few billion more. I think in policy terms it's one of the least consequential debates and campaigns that we've ever seen. And I think it's just evinced a tremendous lack of enthusiasm.
Nikki Sava?
Well, I tend to agree with Greg. It certainly hasn't been about policies. It has been about the personalities of the two leaders. That is what has come down to in the end. And it's kind of been a bit weird, but fascinating at the same time, because just watching it, I think that each man has been able to make the case against the other, but not necessarily the case for himself. Like Morrison has managed to highlight all the risks of Albanese, and Albanese has been able to highlight all the flaws of Morrison. So I get the feeling that voters feel a bit wedged, between a leader that they clearly don't like and another leader that they're not sure is up to the job.
Greg, your expertise is in foreign policy, and it's a very challenging time in global affairs. What do you think should be the top priority for whoever forms government?
Well, Lee, for the rest of our lives, the overwhelming priority is China. It's China, China, China. The new government, whoever it is, has got to turn down the rhetoric, not take a backward step in terms of Australia's interests, but not be so shouty towards China. But the enormous task is to acquire over the next 5 or 10 years some meaningful defence capability. I mean, the government has talked a lot about defence, but it has acquired absolutely no capability. The Ukraine conflict has shown us that we live in the age of missiles and drones. We must be the only defence force of our size and wealth in the world which doesn't have a single armed drone. Whoever gets in on Saturday needs to completely reform the structure of the Australian Defence Force, stop talking so much and start acting more to acquire relevant capability over the next 5 to 10 years.
And Nikki, on the domestic policy front, what do you think needs to be the priority?
Well, obviously there are a lot of challenges with the economy, with inflation, with interest rates going up, and not to mention $1 trillion worth of debt. And also, issues with national security, principally China, as Greg was saying. I think the other big issue, though, that the next leader will need to address is the restoration of integrity and trust in government. I think that has been a really big issue in this campaign, although some people try to say, it's only eggheads and people with lots of money who can afford to worry about things like that. But I do think that in order for a government to succeed, it has to be able to give people at least an idea that it knows what it's doing. And sad to say that in the past 3 years, I don't think that has happened.
Greg, we know that in the US it was, the just disdain and breaching of the public's trust by politicians on both sides that enabled somebody like Donald Trump to come through the middle and have some appeal. Do you think we're in any sort of situation like that in Australia, where the public's kind of discontent with both major parties is opening the way for something new and unexpected?
Yes, I think we're in quite a deceptively dangerous period. So we're down now to about 1/3 for each side of politics and 1/3 undecided. What I think that really is evidence of is people losing faith in our political system. The Westminster system is one party or a coalition is meant to present a coherent program and achieve a mandate for that program, implement the program and get judged on the results. People now are so cynical about politicians and politics, they don't believe anything they're told, actually with pretty good cause, because both sides are so relentlessly misrepresenting facts all the time. And I think you could see a fracturing in Australian politics, as you've seen in other places. I mean, in the French presidential election in the first round, the extreme left and the extreme right got nearly 60%, and we're not immune to that.
Nikki Sava, if Scott Morrison loses on the weekend, he's obviously gone as Liberal leader, but what happens if he wins, given now what we know about his unpopularity? Do the Liberals just keep him there?
Well, I guess it all depends on how big a win he has. If he increases his majority, of course, then he would probably be leader for life. If it's just status quo, in effect a minority government, then I think that they will pretty quickly remove him. You've got to remember that he's about as popular inside the Liberal Party as he is outside the Liberal Party. And the third thing is, if it's a hung parliament, and if it comes to a choice for the Liberals between holding on to government or holding on to Scott Morrison, they will dump him in order to keep the Treasury benches.
Nikki Sava, Greg Sheridan, great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lee and Nikki.
Thank you.
So there you are. These are some of the key things that are on the stake. And of course, Australia votes today. And then, of course, by voting, everyone takes a look at what's happening. So let's take a look at the last 6 weeks and how this election has turned up to now. First visit to the Government House.
This election is about you, no one else.
This is our time.
What's the national unemployment rate?
National unemployment rate at the moment is, I think it's 5.4. Sorry, I'm not sure what it is.
But he didn't miss it by that much. He missed it by that much.
I fessed up, I took responsibility, that is what I will do.
This is a tough job, and it won't be easy under Albanese. The comments that Catherine has made, obviously, were insensitive. There's no need to yell. I share the same red line that the United States has when it comes to these issues.
What do you mean by that?
We won't be having Chinese military naval bases in our region on our doorstep.
This is a massive foreign policy failure.
We have lost the plot in the South Pacific.
Jenny and I have been blessed. We've got 2 children that haven't had to go through that.
I think every child is a blessing for parents.
To respect the challenges they face, not the opposite. And I would hope that people will accept that at face value, and I deeply apologise for any offence that it caused.
A range of people go down with COVID.
Well, the boss has got the bug, so you got me.
Are you not the Labor leader that many people have been looking for?
I certainly feel much better today than I did yesterday.
Has your government just lost this election?
Of course not.
We will put people at the centre of the NDIS.
What are the 6 points?
The 6 points are what we will do in terms was outlined by Bill Shorten.
The 6 points of your policy, Mr Albanese.
He just runs off at the mouth. I mean, it's like he just unzips his head and he just lets everything fall on the table.
I note that Scott Morrison is once again being loose with the truth.
Offer people more choice, and I think that's a very good thing.
Wow, I wish I got that reception in Kooyong. How's that?
Excuse me, who are you?
Supreme Leader. Kim Jong-un. Anyway, watch out.